Looks like hitchhiking doesn't work these days. Anyways, grab a blanket, turn off your lights for 3 true scary stories about hitchhiking. Possible encounter with a handcuff man. When I was a teenager, I lived in a small town located about 30 miles south of Atlanta, Georgia. I did not get my driver's license or my first car until I was almost 20 years old, so between the ages of 16 and 19, I hitchhiked quite a lot. This was in the early 70s, when people still hitchhiked, and many drivers were still willing to pick people up, in spite of the dangers and risks posed by both driver and rider. For the most part, I never had any trouble with the people who offered me rides, but occasionally, I would get picked up by someone who would totally creep me out. This is a story about one creepy ride I accepted and how, 25 years later, I would discover to my great shock that I may have been luckier at the time than I had ever imagined. This incident occurred sometime in the summer of 1974, when I was 17 years old. At the time, I was a 6-foot-tall, 175-pound, blonde-haired and blue-eyed guy who didn't have any trouble connecting with girls for dates. In fact, my story begins with me standing on the side of the highway with my thumb out as I was trying to get back home after spending the weekend with my girlfriend who lived in downtown Atlanta. I was traveling south, away from the city and out into the country where I lived with my parents. I recall that I only had my thumb out for about 15 minutes when a guy in a big white Lincoln Town car, a very large and expensive car at the time, pulled over. As I walked up to the car, I scanned the inside and looked at the driver, trying to size the situation up as I always did, just to be safe. What I saw was a tidy car with a man in the driver's seat who looked to be in his late 30s or mid 40s, dressed in an expensive suit and tie. He had short black hair, wore black-rimmed eyeglasses, and appeared to be rather on the thin side, with a gaunt face and dark eyes. I never learned his name, but for the sake of the story, we'll call him Town Car Man. When I got up to the passenger side of the car, I leaned down towards the open window and told him where I was heading to, and asked him if he was going that far, to which he replied that he was in a soft voice, and waved me into the car. I was not at all wary of him, as by all appearances, he was just an ordinary middle-class businessman, and I opened the door and got into the front seat next to him without any hesitation. In general, when I accepted rides from strangers while hitchhiking, I like to try to engage them in chat, sort of a way to pay them for the ride by providing good conversation, and also to put them at ease about picking me up by showing them that I was harmless and not a creep. However, when I began trying to chat with the town car man in my normal fashion, with typical small talk, I instantly started to get bad vibes from him, as I could tell that he was mostly ignoring what I was saying, and instead kept trying to steer the conversation towards asking me personal questions about myself, such as how old I was, where I went to school, if I had a girlfriend, etc. I tried to answer his questions politely, without really giving away too much information, but Town Car Man kept getting more and more personal, asking questions that hinted at whether or not I was sexually active with my girlfriend, telling me that when he was my age, he went around horny about half of the time, and had always been on the lookout for sexual adventures, etc. As the ride progressed, and we were going further and further out into the country, I began to get very uneasy, as I started to sense that something was not quite right with him. We had left the populated city behind, and were now traveling down an old 2-lane highway through countryside that was sparsely populated. There seemed to be hardly any other cars on the road. The more that Town Car Man continued to ask me questions about myself, wanting to know very personal things about myself, like if I ever had sex with my girlfriend, all the while glancing over at me from time to time with a sort of creepy, knowing look in his eye, as if he was privately enjoying some dirty secret that only he knew about. The more uncomfortable I became. I don't know how better to describe it than that it really began to make me feel uneasy, as his manner seemed very cagey, and I totally sensed that there was some underlying motive to his questioning. It really put me on guard. I began to think about what I should do next, as in, should I ask him to pull over and let me out, even though I was only about halfway to my destination and out in the middle of nowhere? For the first time, I began to realize how vulnerable I felt. But what really made me start to feel uneasy was when he started asking me if I wanted a drink of liquor, indicating that he had several bottles with him in the trunk, and that if I wanted some, he would pull over to the side of the road and mix me up a stiff drink. Because I was growing more and more uncomfortable, I declined his offer, saying that I did not drink, which was a lie, as even at that age, I was already regularly drinking with friends. But he would not take no for an answer, and he kept insisting that I should really just have one drink, because he was such a great drink mixer, and it would only take a minute for him to fix me a very special one for me. After I had declined this offer for something like the fourth time, he abruptly changed tactics again and began telling me a story about when he was about my age and a young guy in the army, and how he used to hitchhike a lot too, and that sometimes he would get picked up by men who wanted to pay him money to have sex with them. And had anything like that ever happened to me? By this time, I had quite enough of all of this, and I looked him straight in the eye and said, "No, that has never happened to me, and nobody had better even offer that to me." Okay, the knowing look vanished instantly from his face, and I could tell that he was now totally irked by how I just reacted to his story. That exchange between us totally changed the dynamic inside the car, and he became very quiet. After a few minutes of this very uneasy silence, he spoke up and told me that he was turning at the next intersection and that I would need to get out of there. At this point, I was actually very relieved and now only wanted to get out of the car. When the car came to a stop, I had just barely gotten out of the car and pushed the door closed when he stepped on the gas and zoomed off, literally jerking the handle of the car out of my hand. I remember that I stood there, watching him drive away until he disappeared down the road, and that my heart was beating very fast. I was both scared and angry at what had just happened. After I calmed down, I resumed hitchhiking until I got another ride that took me home without further incident. Fast forward 25 years, it's 1999, and I'd all but forgotten about the creepy ride with Town Car Man. I'm on the internet reading through a true crime website when I stumbled onto a story about an ultra creepy guy named Robert Bennett, a man who had been arrested after a series of vicious attacks on men whom he picked up in his car, drugged, handcuffed, and then set their genitals on fire with a flammable liquid. The attacks took place over a 20-something year period, starting around 1968 in the Atlanta area and ending with his arrest in 1991. Prior to Bennett's arrest, this attacker became known as the Handcuff Man, and talk within the local gay community was that he was targeting men whom he thought were gay prostitutes. When I saw the photo of Bennett that accompanied the article, my jaw literally dropped open, and the memories of my ride that day in 1974 came flooding back. I was certain I was looking at a picture of Town Car Man, and I was absolutely floored. I do not have any way to prove that the creepy guy who picked me up was in fact this Robert Bennett, but the physical resemblance between what I remember about Town Car Man and the photo of Bennett is absolutely uncanny, and the persistent offer by a Town Car Man to mix me a special drink and his questions about whether or not I'd ever had sex with men for money also seems to indicate that possibility. I should point out that, even though this story took place in the early 70s in the deep south of Georgia, I was actually okay with gay people at the time, and even knew a few people back then who were gay, so I did not have a problem with homosexuality at all, and I still don't. But being heterosexual, I had zero interest in having sex with other men, and even if I had been game for that sort of thing, I always found it highly distasteful when people assume that they could just act in such an unwanted, cagey fashion regarding sexual matters with complete strangers. I always have, and always will, find that to be extremely creepy. Truck driver. We were hitchhiking through Europe with my then boyfriend on our way back home. A truck driver picked us up. We have had a few encounters on our trip before, but we were on the road for about a month and nothing really scary happened until this guy. He was a young guy, about 25, quite regular, spoke English okay, long time away from home. I was a bit younger with my boyfriend being around his age. My boyfriend was tired, so he took a seat on the bed in the truck and wasn't really trying to hold a conversation. So I was in the passenger seat. I think he was even dozing off a little bit, and the driver started complimenting me and asking me about my boyfriend. It was still fine, nothing too weird, and I was just trying to talk about something to be a good company. As we moved on, I started to feel a bit uncomfortable, but didn't let anything on and only told my boyfriend that we should find truck drivers from our country to make the last part of our trip in a one go. I translated to English immediately because the truck driver became agitated and suspicious of what I was saying, and I explained that we were really tired and our plan is to find our truckers before he has to take the long break so that we can go traveling without interruption. We stopped for a short break at a gas station, and my boyfriend decided he was going to look for another truck driver in the parking lot and left me with this guy alone. Damn. The truck driver came on to me real hard, and I was scared shitless and didn't fight back. I could feel how aroused he was, and there was no doubt of his intentions. Luckily, my boyfriend was away for just a minute. At that moment, I realized we needed to get out of that situation fast. I didn't say anything to my boyfriend because I was scared of how he would react, so I decided to pretend nothing had happened. I was determined to get out at the next stop. We reached a large gas station for truck drivers only and told our driver we were going to take a look for other drivers that were headed our way. In between, on our way to the station, this guy got in touch with another driver, saying he could also take us, maybe one at a time. Damn, I thought, now he's planning a threesome. When I finally got alone with my boyfriend, I remained calm and just hinted at what had happened and insisted that we are not staying with this driver no matter what. It took us about 5 minutes to find a group of truck drivers from our country. They were having beers and cracking jokes, and 2 of them agreed to take us. I jumped with joy. We went back to the truck to get our things. The guy had already brought his friend along and was offering my boyfriend to take a shower at the gas station. He was going to pay for him. For no obvious reason, he was quite persistent and, as I will always remember, he never offered it to me. Needless to say, these guys were very disappointed to see us go when I was taking our backpacks from the truck. I never told my ex-boyfriends about the details. I was just lucky that we were away from that truck driver, and I think he never realized how bad the situation was at the time. I was playing it cool the whole time, but inside I was shaking. I could see how desperate that truck driver was and how much he wanted to get rid of my boyfriend. I was so angry at myself for staying with him in the truck by myself, but then all of our things were there, and angry for not fighting him back. But it was so sudden, and I got really scared. Well, I would never hitchhike alone. How my dad convinced me never to hitchhike. I was just recently reminded of this story by another hitchhiking story on here. My dad used to tell me and my brother all sorts of stories from his youth hitchhiking down the East Coast. There are 2 stories that have always stuck with me, and I figured if you guys like this one, I'll post the other one as well. When my dad was 15, he left home in Massachusetts and hitchhiked down to Florida where his older sister was living in Daytona. This event apparently happened on this trip somewhere in Virginia. He had been trying to hitch a ride outside of some nice city, though he could never remember which one. This happened in 1976, and there were a lot of drugs done. And this really nice car stopped and picked him up. He and the driver get to talking, and the guy tells my dad that he's a surgeon at one of the local hospitals. gives him a business card, and tells him that if he ever needs anything at that hospital, to give them his name. All is going well, and he is apparently heading pretty far south for some family function, so it's a long way that my dad doesn't have to walk. He seems like a nice professional guy, clean cut and well spoken. Then, shit starts to get weird. The doctor starts giving my dad the side eye and seems like he wants to say something, but can't figure out how to say it. Of course, my dad is just sort of ignoring him because, as he says, I've been on the road for a while and hadn't had a shower or change in clothes in weeks. Then the guy finally comes out and says it. Can I suck your dick? My dad was obviously taken aback by this and tells him no. Please, just let me suck it a little. No. I'll give you $50 if you let me suck your dick. No. How about you just let me see it? Can I fucking see it? No, I think you better let me off here, okay? And surprisingly, the guy does. He pulls off at a rest stop and lets my dad out. Before he pulls away, though, he hands my dad that $50 and tells him, sorry about that, man. I hope I didn't, blow your mind or anything. This isn't super creepy, but I thought you guys might like it. My dad always said that the guy didn't seem like a bad guy, just really messed up, and honestly, sorry to have freaked him out so bad. I have no way of knowing if this is totally true, except my aunt says my dad told her the same story when he got to Florida a few weeks later.